This was going to be a two-part series, so I decided to do a two-part series on this one because there's a lot of teaching that I want to do in the first portion to really set up what's going to happen in the second portion. So I want to do two parts to this particular section. I don't know when I'm going to do the second part. Inshallah, I'll do it maybe next week sometime, just depending on the new baby and everything. So again, I'm super excited to bring you this one because this one I think is really going to help open some eyes. This is a lot of the teaching and research that I'm doing in preparation for a book that I'm getting ready to do. So most of you, or some of you may know that I'm working on a second book right now, and that book is titled The Modern Day Slave Who Taught You to Hate Yourself. Hey mama, good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Good morning for those that are overseas that are joining us. And like I said, good afternoon to everyone. Good night. Shabbat Shalom for those that are believers in the Torah and the teachings of Moses, and those that are of the Israelite lineage or claim that Israelite lineage. So Shabbat Shalom. I know it's a little bit early for me here anyway. It's still light out, so it will be starting soon. For those that don't know what that means peaceful Sabbath. So Shabbat is the Sabbath, and then of course Shalom means peace. So Shabbat Shalom to all that are out there. And then Eid Mubarak to those that are celebrating Eid as well, those that are celebrating the Hajj. Those that in this pandemic, where it's been limited for people being able to actually share, to travel and be able to participate in the pilgrimage, but there are a few, I think about 1,000 or so that they've allowed to actually grace the holy city of Mecca. So again, Eid Mubarak to those who are celebrating there as well. And as I always greet you, I want to greet you in the Arabic language, Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be unto you. And I truly hope that everyone, in spite of all that is going on in the world today, I hope that not only are you experiencing peace, or if you're not experiencing peace, I hope that you find that soon within your heart. It is peace that brings about the joy and love and the happiness that we should be experiencing. And it is that which I, want to provide a blessing for you today. So I'm going to jump right in. I mentioned it a little bit earlier when I posted the intro for this to let you guys know that I was going to go live today. I'm going to start in Deuteronomy. I want to go quite a bit in depth through Deuteronomy, and for those that know and have studied the books or studied the Torah, you understand that Deuteronomy is the fifth and final book in the Torah in which Moses gives his instructions again to the children of Israel. So just to give you a little bit of backdrop of this particular teachings or the lessons that happen here in Deuteronomy. As you remember, Moses leads the children out of Egypt, and then they're in the wilderness, and of course the sins and the things that they committed while in the wilderness. And so the need or the necessity for the Torah was that to be able to bring about the order and to bring about the keeping of the children of Israel within the breastplate of God's holy sanctuary. And even, there's some warnings that are in there, and I'll talk a little bit about those, and that's some of the things that I want to cover as I bring you this teaching today. I hope that this brings you life, I hope it brings you breath, and I hope that it really uplifts you and helps you to understand really, truly who you are. By understanding that, it helps you to be able to understand how we can move forward with togetherness, with love, with peace, with joy. And that's something that our world needs today. So again, I'm excited to bring you these teachings because I think this is really going to help bring some uplifting and some awareness to who people really are in this world today. And it will expose some imposters as well. So you get ready for it. That's going to come as well. I'm going to start with Deuteronomy 6, and I'm going to start with verse 4. So if you've got a reliable translation, feel free to jump in and follow along with me. I'm going to read for again, meaning purposes, the New Living Translation is the translation that I will be reading. I do have a parallel here that I'm going to use as well for the Orthodox the Orthodox Jewish version. Actually, the complete Jewish version is the version that I'm going to use for parallel, just in case there were some things that need clarity. As I go through this journey, if you have any questions or comments, or if there's anything that stands out to you, or if you, anything you want to say or mention, drop it in the comment. I'll come back and check at various times throughout the comments. I'll try to address any questions that you may have, and any insight. I'll try and add that to the video as well. Again, my goal, my hope is that this is uplifting. It brings you joy to really know, and it exposes you to who you really are. So again, Deuteronomy 6, I'm going to start at verse 4. I'm going to go through pretty much the entire chapter. It's pretty short, and then I'll jump forward into some additional verses as well as we move forward. The topics and the subjects that I want to cover today, I mentioned earlier that I want to do a two-part series to this one. This is part 1. So again, I'm going to start with Deuteronomy. I want to cover a little bit about Moses, the children of Israel, the Torah, and then I want to move into the history of America and talk a little bit about what happened with the beginning and the founding of this country. Most of you are aware of Christopher Columbus. I'll go through a little bit of that, explore a little bit of Christopher Columbus. I'll talk a little bit about the slavery, not only for the Portuguese, the Europeans, the British, and the Spaniards. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll explain a little bit about some of the first slave ships as well. And I think this is going to be important. This is where some of your real eye-opening moments may come from, is as I explain a little bit about some of the original or the first slave ships that actually sailed not only to the coast of West Africa, but also to some of the southern tips and southern places in America. So I want to go through that. I will continue part 2. My hope, again, like I said, maybe next week. I don't know when, inshallah, whenever, Lord wills, whenever that happens to be. But to continue this, I want to get into just talking again about the conditions of slavery as well. I want to talk a little bit about the King James Version, or translation of the canons into English. And then I want to talk a little bit about Willie Lynch as well. I've mentioned that in a few of my videos that I've done in the past, was mentioning Willie Lynch. I'll fast forward a little bit, and then I want to talk about 1787. So, and talk a little bit about the 3/5 compromise in the next video. The 1800s, what happened in the 1800s, that's going to expose you to a lot of raw history. It's also going to explain to you a lot of what's happened with the natives of this land and where they were pushed into. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. I want to get into a little bit about the genocide that happened and that around the Jews and Hitler's Nazi Germany. I want to talk a little bit about that as well, and then I want to finish off with some Quranic reading, as well as a little bit of Isaiah as well. So that's what you can look forward to for part 2. Again, as I go through a lot of this, if you have any comments, please drop your comments in the chat pod. If you have any questions, drop those in the chat pod as well. I'm going to go ahead, let me post where I am starting this at, so you guys have reference as well. I'll pin these to the video, so that way they're in there. But I am at Deuteronomy 6, and I'm going to start with verse 4 and continue from there. So I posted that in the chat pod so you guys can see it there. And it reads there again, like I gave you the backdrop earlier. This is Moses speaking to the children of Israel right after they have left the land of Egypt, and they've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years or so, and then they're getting ready to take possession of the land in which God had promised them. So this is one of the promises that was made to the children of Israel by God after he brought them out of the land of Egypt and done all the signs and wonders and miracles and brought them out under the oppression that they were facing there. So again, Deuteronomy 6, starting with verse 4. So listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all of your strength. It's very important. Verse 6. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commandments that I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you're at home, and when you're going on the road, and when you're going to bed, and when you're getting up. Tie them on your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now again, Moses is trying to stress the importance to the children of Israel of what he's about to tell them, because he's giving them the life-giving teachings. He's giving them life. He's telling them what will happen. He's giving them life, and he's also giving them the results of death. He's giving them that as well. Verse 10. The Lord your God will soon bring you into the land which he swore to give to you when he made your vow to your ancestors, Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob. So as you guys know, if you think about almost every religion, there's some exceptions, but most of the main religions. So if you think of Christianity, you think of Judaism, you think of, Islam, and quite a few others. Most of them are going to tie lineage back to Abraham. And to tie lineage back to Abraham, as a lot of people know, he's one of the forefathers. He's the forefather of the children of Israel. And so he was one of the ones who followed after God's heart wholeheartedly. Even the Holy Quran explains it, that he was an upright man. That's who he was. He was an upright man who was zealous after God's heart. He was a man after God's heart. You'll hear the same thing in relation to Moses. You'll hear that about all of the great prophets. If you go back and you read, you're going to hear that about all of the great prophets. So to be clear, again, that verse 10 is important. So let me continue from there. It is a land that is large, prosperous cities that you did not build. The houses will be richly stocked with goods that you did not produce. You will draw water from cisterns that you did not dig, and you will eat of vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. You have eaten your fill in this land, so be careful not to forget the Lord who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. You must fear the Lord your God and serve him. When you take an oath, you must use only his name. So again, this is verse 14. I'm going to skip down just a little bit. He continues on that track. He says in verse 14, he says, you must not worship any other gods of the neighboring nations. It's important. The Lord your God, who lives among you, is a jealous God. His anger will flare up against you, and he will wipe you off the face of the earth. You must not test the Lord your God as you did when you complained at Massah. Now, for those who don't know the story that happened there, that's when the fire actually came down. So again, that's a good story. My encouragement is that go through all of this, go back and read it for yourself, because it's going to really help bring you some context to what I'm talking about and why it's important and how it relates to the world of slavery and the world that we're in today. So again, important to go back. 17, you must diligently obey the commandments of the Lord your God, all the laws and decrees that I have given you. Do what is right and what is good in the Lord's sight, so that it will go well with you. Then you will enter and occupy the land the Lord has sworn to give to your ancestors. You will drive out all your enemies living in the land, just as the Lord has said you would. In the future, your children will ask, what is the meaning of the laws, decrees, and regulations of the Lord our God has commanded us to obey? You must tell them, when we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. This is important. Now, again, as it relates to slavery, this is super important. So you must tell them, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand. Now, those who know about the miracles and the wonders that were done there. So it says the Lord did miraculous signs and wonders before our eyes, dealing terrifying blows against Egypt, Pharaoh, and all of his people. He brought us out of Egypt so that he could give us this land that he had sworn to give to our ancestors. And the Lord our God commanded us to obey all his decrees and to fear him, so that we can continue to bless us and preserve our lives, as he has done to this day. For we will be counted as righteous when we obey all his commands. So this is important. When we obey all the commands of the Lord, our God has given us. So that's again, I wanted to start there because that gives a little bit of the foundation of what Moses is trying to get the children of Israel to really understand. As you go forward, you're going to find that Moses continues this trek. He continues to give them additional instructions, additional commandments, additional ways of being able to carry out life in a way that leads to righteousness. That is important. So I want to go forward. I'm going to continue forward, and I want to go now to Deuteronomy 28. Now, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time in 28 because 28 gives not only the blessings that Moses spoke a little bit of here in the early chapters of Deuteronomy 6. It's going to go through a little bit more detail of the blessings that are going to come. It's also going to go into the curses that will come as a result of not following the statutes and commandments. And this is important because it sets the tone of what happened with slavery and why slavery came about. Now, some have said recently in the news, the good old senator in the great state of Arkansas said that slavery was a necessary evil. again, those are his words, not my words. But he said that, and it wasn't necessary. This proves right here what I'm telling you, what I'm taking you through today is going to prove to you that it wasn't necessary. But it happened as a result of actions and behaviors. So that's what I want you to, that's the important factor that I want you to take away from this, is it happened as a result of actions and behaviors. So I'm going to go to, again, Deuteronomy 28. I'm going to go there. And I'm going to start at the beginning with this one because I think this one's good. It goes through the blessings, and then I'll skip down a little bit and go through some of the curses. But starting with the blessings, it says, verse 1, if you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully keep all of his commands that I am giving you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the world. You will experience all the blessings if you obey the Lord your God. Your towns and your fields will be blessed. Your children and your crops will be blessed. Your offspring, your herds, and your flocks will be blessed. Verse 5, your fruit of your bread basket will be blessed. Again, he's going through a laundry list of blessings. Verse 6, wherever you go and whatever you do will be blessed. The Lord will conquer your enemies when they attack you. You will attack your enemies in one direction, but will scatter them in seven. The Lord will guarantee a blessing on everything that you do and fulfill your storehouses with grain. The Lord your God will bless you in the land he is giving you if you obey his statutes and commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. The Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he has sworn to do. He would do. Then all the nations of the world will see that you are a people claimed by God, and they will stand in awe of you. He goes on to talk a little bit about prosperity, so I'm going to skip over verse 11. He talks a little bit about the treasures in the lands, the heaven will continue to rain out, and he talks a little bit more about that. And then verse 14, I'll start there. You must not turn away from any of the commandments that I'm giving you today, nor follow any other god and worship them. Now this is again important. He goes into a little bit more detail in just a second about the people that are around the children of Israel. As he mentioned, as I go back to verse chapter 6, in chapter 6 he mentioned that the land that they are inheriting it was the land of other people. God forced those people out, and they even had to go to war. So for those that know, right after this, after Moses dies in Deuteronomy, you see the death of Moses. He ordains Joshua to take over, and then Joshua immediately he starts to go into battle with some of the people that are in the land as he was commanded by Moses and by God. So you'll see those things there. So I want to get down to verse 15. This talks about the curses. So I've talked about the blessings. Again, the gist and the principle of what I've established so far with you is that if you obey the commandments which Moses has given, right, the Torah, if you think about almost all major religions, believe in the teachings of Moses. Moses was one of the early prophets, one of the first prophets, right, that showed signs and wonders given from God, and who follow God wholeheartedly. And that's important because he's the one who establishes or sets up the what should be the established law and the things that God is giving him to tell the people to do. All right. So verse 15. But if you refuse to listen to the Lord your God and do not obey all the commandments and decrees that I'm giving you today, all these curses will come and overwhelm you. Your towns and your fields will be cursed. Your fruit basket and bread boards will be cursed. Your children and your crops will be cursed. So again, he goes through a list of the different curses that are there, and he talks a little bit about some of those things. I'm going to go back to 22. Talks about the curses that are going to happen, and then it goes into verse 22, which is where I want to do a little bit of focus there. The Lord will strike you with wasting disease, fever, and inflammation, scorching heat and drought, and blight and mildew. These disasters will pursue you until you die. The skies above will be as unyielding as bronze, and the earth beneath will be as hard as iron. Now, again, he's talking about the land itself, right? I want to scroll down just a little bit to 25. 25 is important. The Lord will cause you to be defeated by your enemies. You will attack your enemies in one direction, but you will be scattered from them in seven. You will be an object of horror to all the kingdoms of heaven. Your corpse will be food for all of the scavenging birds and wild animals, and no one will be there to chase them away. So again, it continues. So in verse 27, it talks about the boils that happened in Egypt. So most of you know about the plagues that happened in Egypt. Again, it's relating that to that because that's something that the children of Israel could relate to at the time. It talks about striking them with madness, panic, blindness, all of these different things. They will grope in the darkness but can't find their way. All of these things he's talking about. Verse 30, here's another one. You will be engaged to a woman, but another man will sleep with her. You will build a house, but someone else will live in it. You will plant a vineyard, but you will never enjoy its fruits. Now, what does that sound like to you? For those who know a little bit about slavery, when slavery was really established here in the States, what happened when slavery was first originally established here in the States? Most of you know what they did in the auctions and being able to auction off the slaves and being able to, the slave master did to the women specifically in America and in the West Indies as well, and other lands in which the slaves were enslaved into. I'm going to continue just a little bit. I'm going to skip down just a little bit. Now, verse 32. You will watch as your sons and daughters are taken away as slaves. Your heart will beat for them, but you won't be able to help them. A foreign nation you have never heard about will eat the crops. You work so excuse me. You work so hard to be able to. So think about that. I want you to think about this for just a second. He's talking about your sons and daughters. You yearn for them, but you won't be able to get them. They'll be taken away, which we know that was one of the things that if we even examine Willie Lynch spoke about that. He talked about dividing up the family, taking the biggest and the blackest person and pitting them against them. I'll get into that again a little bit later on, but I want you to understand where you're seeing or where you started to see a lot of this. Okay. So going down to 33. So and I mentioned this earlier as well, but a foreign nation that you've never heard about will eat your crops that you work so hard to grow. You will suffer under constant oppression and harsh treatment. So again, scrolling down just a little bit further, I want to go on down just a little bit further and talk about the exile. So the Lord will exile you and your kings to a nation unknown to you and your ancestors. There in exile, you will worship gods of wood and stone. This again is important. It's telling you that if you don't follow those statutes and commandments, which Moses is giving you, the Torah, which again, if you think about any modern Judaism, you think about Christianity, that was the original founders of Christianity. If you think about the things that the one which most of you call Jesus, he did. You notice that even if you look at John 5, when it talks about him. Going out and fasting for the 40 days and 40 nights and being tempted by Satan. When he came back with his rebuttals to everything that Satan was saying, he was using Scripture, Old Testament Scripture, to be able to fight him. And so, again, I want you to understand where he was getting a lot of this from. He's getting it directly from here. So, those statutes and commandments are super important. It's telling you about what will happen if you don't obey those things right here. It's giving you exactly what's going to happen. So you will become an object of horror, ridicule, and mockery amongst all the nations in which the Lord send you. You will plant much, but will harvest little. The locusts will eat your crops. So again, he's warning. I want to continue. Going down to verse 43. The foreigner living among you will become stronger and stronger, and you will become weaker and weaker. They will lend you money, but you will not lend to them. They will be the head, you will be the tail. If you refuse to listen to the Lord your God and obey the commandments and decrees that I have given you, all these curses will pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed. Again, that's verse 45. So I'm gonna jump down a little bit further. I want to continue this because there's some really good reading that's in here. So I want to go down just a little bit more. So verse 49. The Lord will bring a distant nation against you from the end of the earth, and they will swoop down on you like a vulture. It is a nation whose language you do not understand, a fierce and heartless nation that shows no respect to the old and no pity for the young. Its army will devour your livestock and your crops, and you will be destroyed. So, again, and that's verse 50 right there. I want to skip down just a little bit further. I want to go to 54. The most tenderhearted man amongst you will have no compassion for his own brother, his beloved wife, and his surviving children. So think about what was done for those who know a lot of the stories. What was done to the first early slaves? Again, I want to keep going down just a little bit. Verse 58. If you refuse to obey the words of the instructions that are written in this book, and you do not fear the glorious and awesome name of the Lord your God, then the Lord will overwhelm you and your children with indescribable plagues. These plagues will be intense and without relief, making you miserable and unbearably sick. Again, he's talking about the diseases that he will inflict that are coming from, from Egypt, and the things that they saw happen while they were there under the oppression of Pharaoh. Scrolling down just a little bit. So again, verse 64, the Lord will scatter you amongst all the nations from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship foreign gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known, gods made of wood and stone. There amongst these nations you will find no peace and no place to rest, and the Lord will cause your heart to tremble, your eyesight to fail, and your soul to despair. Your life will constantly hang in the balance, and you will live night and day in fear, unsure if you will survive. In the morning you will say, if only it were night. And in the evening you will say, if only it were morning. And you will be terrified by the awful horrors you see around you. Then the Lord will send you back to Egypt in ships to a destination I promised you would never see again. There you will offer to sell yourselves to your enemies as slaves, but no one will buy you. So that's the end of that chapter 28. I wanted to go through the majority of 28 because 28 gives you the blessing, and it also talks about the curse. This is important because this helps you to understand. Now, the things that were mentioned in there, I'm going to dive deeper into a lot of those things when I dive into the history of slavery here in America. So I want to go forward just a little bit. I'm going to talk through a few more verses in 29. I want to go to 29. I want to do 14 and 15 and 29. And so then I'll come back in just a second. So 14 and 15, if I scroll down to those two. So Deuteronomy 29, again, verse 14 and 15. But you are not the ones with whom I am making this covenant with is cursed. I am making this covenant both with you who stand here today in the presence of the Lord your God, and also with future generations who are not standing here today. Now, how does that relate? That's important because if you look at what has happened with the founding and the building of this nation, you can see there clearly that what Moses is giving instructions from God to the children of Israel is that not only will these blessings and curses continue, they will continue for periods and generations. It says there, not only do I make this covenant with you, but I also make it with those of your future generations that are not standing here today. So that's important because people will tell you that, oh, you don't need to keep the statutes and commandments. That's what, Jesus came and died for our sins. Agreed. But he didn't die with the impression or the intention that we could continue in our sinful natures and our lust. And that is the reason why it's important that you go back and examine what are the statutes and commandments that God was commanding us to do. What are the things that lead to righteousness as Moses described it in chapter 6. Again, if you're just joining and you hadn't caught all of this, my encouragement to you, go back and read it. I started in Deuteronomy 6 with 28, did most of 28, which is really good, and then I did a few verses out of 29. I'm going to go now over to 30. I'm going to read 2 through 10. So Deuteronomy 30, 2 through 10. If at that time you and your children return to the Lord your God, and if you obey with all of your heart and all of your soul, all of the commandments that I'm giving you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes. He will have mercy on you and gather you back from all the nations where he has scattered you. Even though you are banished to the ends of the earth, the Lord your God will gather you from there and bring you back again. And that's 2 through verse 4. Why is that important? Because he's telling you that even though you were a rebellious, stiff-necked people, as he described throughout Exodus, as he described throughout Numbers, as he described throughout Deuteronomy, and you saw the actions and behaviors of the children of Israel. They'd been under oppression for so long that became their way of life. They had had generation after generation after generation in this repetitive cycle of what was Egyptian. And that was idol worship. If you know anything about Egyptian history, you've seen a lot of the different idols and the different gods that were there in the land of Egypt. That was idol worship. And that was one of the first commandments that God gave. If you go back to if you remember what I mentioned a little bit earlier. So he's saying that even if you go away, he's already see, that's the thing. The thing about God is that God already knows you before you know yourself. He knows the things you profess out loud and the things you keep concealed within your heart. And with him knowing that, he knows what you're going to do. People try to think they're smart and outsmart God. You can't outsmart God. God is the all-knowing, the all-wise. So even though you try and you plot and you scheme, and you're just doing the works of the enemy. Turn back to him, as it mentions in Deuteronomy 30. It's talking about coming back to him. I'm going to go back to verse 5. The Lord your God will return you to the land that belongs to your ancestors, and you will possess the land again. Then he will make you even more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. The Lord your God will change your heart and the heart of your descendants, so that you will love him with all of your heart and your soul, so that you may live. The Lord your God will inflict all the curses on your enemies and on those who hate and persecute you. Then you will again obey the Lord and keep all of his commandments that I am giving you today. The Lord your God will then make you successful in everything that you do. He will give you many children and numerous livestock, and he will cause your fields to produce abundant harvests. For the Lord will again delight in being good to you as he was to your ancestors. Verse 10, let me finish off here. The Lord your God will delight in you if you obey his voice and keep his commandments and decrees written in the book of instruction, and if you turn to the Lord your God with all of your heart and your soul. So I read through Deuteronomy 6, which talks about Moses setting and laying the foundation. As you can see, again, the whole book is important. If you go from a context standpoint, go read the entire book. The entire book gives you what Moses laid out for the children of Israel. It also explains to you a little bit of why he explained those things to them. Again, this is for those that are Torah followers, for those that claim lineage to being a children or being a child of Israel. This is a part of what you claim that you believe in. This will help you to distinguish between the imposter and those who really truly love God, because those who keep his commandments and his statutes, you will see it in their works. You'll see it in their deeds, you'll see it in their actions and their behaviors. And what he's saying in Deuteronomy 6 specifically was, as I mentioned in the video earlier, for those who actually follow the commandments, it leads to nothing but righteousness. As was mentioned in the New Testament, against good things that are good, there are no laws. Paul explained that. If you go look in, Galatians, if you go look in almost all of the books that he wrote to the churches that he had established throughout the world, if you go read those letters, Paul explains that against good things, there is no law. I'm going to finish off at 31, and then we're going to dive into some of the history. So 31, 16, and 17 is where I want to go to. So here's verse 16. Again, my encouragement to you is go read this for yourself, and then think about what you know about history. Think about what you know about history, and then see if that arrives you at what is the true knowledge of who you are today. This is going to be eye-opening. Again, my goal is to teach you, to bring you into the realization of who you are, so you can bring yourself together. We need unity more than anything. Division it's the biggest. It's bigger than this pandemic that we're supposed to be in. Division right now is rampant. So allow this to be a unifying voice for you. So Deuteronomy 31, verses 16 and 16 through 18 actually is what I'm gonna read for you today. So the Lord said to Moses, "You are about to die and join your ancestors. After you are gone, these people will begin to worship foreign gods, the gods of the land where they are going. They will abandon me and break my covenant that I have made with them. Then my anger will blaze forth against them. I will abandon them, hiding my face from them, and they will be devoured. Terrible trouble will come down on them, and on that day they will say, 'These disasters have come down on us because God is no longer amongst us.' At that time, I will hide my face from them on account of all the evil they commit by worshiping other gods." So there you have it. That's Deuteronomy 31. This is right before Moses dies, and even Lord mentions there, it says, the Lord said to Moses, "You are about to die and join your ancestors." He's already telling Moses before he even leaves this earth and is gathered back to his ancestors, as he mentioned, what the people are going to do and what's going to happen as a result of what they're going to do. So again, your thought and your thinking that you can outsmart God, stop it. He knows the professed and the unprofessed things that you do, and whether you speak it, whether you think it, and you don't act on it, or you do act on it. He already knows beforehand what you're going to do. Now that's important. Again, I've set some foundation for you in the scriptures. We went through Deuteronomy 6. I went through Deuteronomy 28. I then went into 29, 30, and a little bit of 31. The reason this gives context, this gives background for us to, this is the foundation that I've laid for you. This gives you an understanding of what is going on here. So now I want to dive in, as I mentioned earlier, I want to dive in now and talk a little bit about the history of America. And most of us would attribute the history of America or the founding of America to Christopher Columbus. As a matter of fact, in October we celebrate Columbus Day, as most of us do, and that is to celebrate the voyages that were made by Christopher Columbus. So I want to bring that in and talk a little bit about that. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about why is Deuteronomy important? Why is that piece important? Why did I take all that time to go through reading a lot of what's there in Deuteronomy? For one, Moses, or Musa, as those that speak Hebrew would say it, Moses was the one who gave the Torah, or the teachings, to the children of Yisrael. And he was considered to be the founding father of the Jewish faith. Almost all Jews follow some form or variation of the Torah. And those who are of Christianity, they also know the story of Moses. They believe in Moses because Moses was the founding father who brought the children of Israel, God's chosen people, out of Egypt and out from under the oppression that was happening to them there. So again, that's why this is important. So then the question then becomes, and I have to ask this question: what was the religion of Moses? That's an important question. I'm going to come back. I'm going to end this section with that. So let's fast forward. I want to dive in and talk a little bit about the good old Christopher Columbus. Now, for those who know the history of slavery, slavery, as we talk about it, slavery didn't start with America. It didn't start with the founding of our country. It didn't start with the West Indies. It didn't start with Christopher Columbus. Slavery was already something that had been used for years and years and years. I mean, you can go back even to the 3500 BC. You can see in Mesopotamia there was some of the first, slavery there, and it even goes back even further than that. Whether you call it slavery or indentured servitude, which is a little bit different, completely different. The difference is that slavery, you're forced into working. Indentured servant, you are either paid a wage or you are indentured to the person. I'll give you an example of that. Think about Jacob. Jacob went to work for Laban. And he went to work for Laban to win over the heart of his daughter, to then marry her. Now, although Laban changed, what happened. Again, this is all in Genesis. If you go back to Genesis, start around about chapter 28 or so, you'll start reading a little bit about that. But that's an example of indentured servant, because he had a purpose or a reason and a reward for why he was serving. Slavery, completely different. That's forced labor. I had to set that difference because it's important to understand that the history of slavery didn't just start with America, although many may think. Now, America was exploited for its slavery highly. Basically, we'll get into that. But I want to make sure to mention that. So, fast forward, if we talk, I talked a little bit about the slavery and some of the different empires, the Byzantine, Ottoman War that was about slavery in the 14th century, through the 20th centuries in Europe. So that was about slavery. Even the Arabs had slavery back in the day. You think about the slave trade that happened in the West and Central Asia, Northern Eastern Africa, India, Europe. So again, this was something that was widespread. It didn't just start. Even Africa themselves, they enslaved their own people. So there's history of that as well. But I want to fast forward to that voyage that good old Christopher Columbus took back in 1492. Now, for most of you that know, that he sailed with 3 ships. There were 3 ships in his fleet when he did his sailing. Now, a lot of people probably are also familiar with the triangle trade, where he would make a stop, trade with people there, make another stop, do some additional trading before he then returned back to his homeland, or the place where he voyaged from. So he had 3 ships in that fleet in 1492 when he made that sail. And they landed, for most people that don't know, they landed in the West Indies. And this was around October the 12th. So again, they set out. And the goal, let me talk a little bit about the goal of Columbus's journey. A lot of people don't remember this or don't know that originally he had lobbied with Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II. He had lobbied with them about expanding or profiting from the spice trade. So a big thing back then was sailing across the ocean to India, trading spice, or to the Indies and trading spices, being able to trade for spices. There were various commodities that were traded back then that they traded for spices. Spice was a huge thing back then. For those that are using that slap your mama sauce, you know the importance of spice. So they were trading it. And for those that also know the Indian culture, you know that India is rich in different types of spices, herbs, and all of the above. So his goal was to set out. He thought that by sailing a different route, he could shorten the route to be able to get to the Indies faster, in hopes of being able to participate again in that spice trade. So again, he lobbied. He kept on going back to the Queen and the King at the time of Spain. And they finally agreed to sponsor this journey to the West. Now, again, you have to also think about this. In those days, the thought was that you were going to fall off the earth if you sailed a certain way or you went a certain route, that you may fall off the earth. No one knew at that time, thinking about it being round. So, just thinking about that. Catalina, nice to see you as well. Hope all is well. I miss all of my family back in Mexico. So again, Christopher Columbus, he set out on his journey and found himself into an entanglement, an entanglement in what we would consider today to be the island of the Bahamas. So this was around August. August is when he actually left. And then he made it there around October. So October the 12th is the official date that a lot of historians attribute to the date in which he landed on an island now in the Bahamas. So again, the exact location is not specifically certain, but what we do know is that he did land there. The other thing that is also understood is that he then, after he, what people consider to be discovered, this land, which there were already people inhabited, so it's kind of hard to discover a land that's already inhabited by people. Again, that's why you also get the naming of the Indians. So the first are the Native Americans that were already here. The first sailors that sailed to this land called them Indians. Well, that explains why they called them Indians, because they thought they had landed in India to participate in this spice trade. They thought by selling west, they were going to land and cut down their trip and land in India, but they didn't. They landed in the Americas. Now, here's the other thing. You know, most of you are aware of his first journey, of course, the 1492, because that's considered to be the birth of the nation, right, of the country. Well, he made additional trips back after he made that first trip. After he made that first trip, he took some of the people and some of the items that were discovered here and brought them back with him in his trade. That's important. That's very important. Because he later came back and he visited the islands again, and it's believed that he visited Cuba. So for those that know Cuba, and then Hispaniola, which is the modern day, if you think about Dominican Republic, Haiti, those islands that are in that area, that's what's considered to be Hispaniola. And so, again, he established his first colony of what they now call Haiti. So for those, most of you know about Haiti, you've heard about it. But again, that's important. So these were some of the first European settlements that happened in America. Now, when he arrived back, it was 1493 when he arrived back. Now, at that time, he had some captives with him. Now, this is important. It's important because a lot of people don't know. What they don't know is that in his second journey back to the islands, in his manifesto, in his documents that he actually wrote, Christopher Columbus wrote that in the islands, some of the natives of the island gave him gold-tipped spears, gold-tipped spearheads, which they had said were brought to the islands by black-skinned people that had come in large boats and that came from the south and the southeast. Now, why is that important? Archaeologists have done, tests of those artifacts that Columbus had brought back. Now, this is in his manifesto. My encouragement to you is go read the manifesto from his second voyage. You can read these words in his manifesto. This is what Columbus is documenting himself. But yet, he is attributed for founding this nation. Now, why is that important? Because a lot of people already know from a historic standpoint that there were already sailors and explorers who came from the west coast of Africa already and had already landed in the islands. This was already discovered. There were also some that were living here in the land already. Again, these are important facts for you to understand, because this helps you to understand the role that was already taking place in the world. Yet Columbus is the one who gets the gets attributed for founding and discovering this land. So why is that important? The arrowheads, they were found after they did the examination of the metal composition of the actual arrowheads. They were found to be the exact composition of the arrowheads that were used in West Africa by tribes for thousands of years prior to the ones that Columbus had brought back. Again, now if you want to go read about this, let me give a little bit of reference for this as well. Leo Wiener had a couple of books. Well, he's an author. He actually was a Harvard professor as well. But he wrote a lot of books. And a 3-part series that he wrote is called Africa and the Discovery of America. Again, very interesting work that he did in being able to do the research. Now, he wrote these books. This was back a while back in the 20s. He wrote these books before the time where we did, we did the actual archaeological research to actually verify and confirm all the things that he was doing in his work. So after that, as you guys already know, there were a lot of boats that were discovered. It was very recent in Africa that were discovered some old petrified boats that were believed to be thousands and thousands of years old, that were built out of the trunks of trees. So again, we attribute that to Columbus. So it's important that you understand that he noted in his own manifesto that the natives of the island provided him with the gold-tipped spearheads, which they said were brought by black-skinned people in large boats from the south and southeast. For those that know the currents in the Atlantic, you know that that's the way that the currents flow into the islands that we now know to be Haiti, Dominican Republic, Bahamas, those islands. All right. So we've laid a little bit of foundation about Christopher Columbus and who he was, and about the founding of America, and about the fact that he also took back natives, and that's when the initial enslavement began. So he took them back. They were used as slaves as he took them back. Now, havoc was wreaked in the islands a long way after that. As most of you know, it was the Europeans that brought about the plagues and the rats and the things like that. The bubonic plague, you probably read about that in your history books, or you've taken classes that have talked about the history of the bubonic plague. And that pretty much wiped out a lot of the island because they were not used to those types of diseases in the islands. That's important. That's super important. Because I want to get into my next subject, which is one of the very first slave ships to sail. Now, the history of America will tell you that 1619, near Jamestown, Virginia, was the first arrival of slaves from Western Africa. That's what it will tell you. However, I'm going to explore something with you today that I want you to go do your own research as well. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other. This is out there available for you. One of the first slave ships that was used was called Jesus of Lubeck. Let me say that again. Jesus of Lubeck. That was one of the first slave ships that was used. Now, to talk through that, I want you to understand this. So, as I mentioned, that Columbus had brought back the artifacts and the natives back in 1493. Now, the king was super excited about all of this. He was excited about the success of overseas exploration, and then both the Portuguese and the Spanish king were super important in this time because they were the ones who started the process of getting into what we call the Atlantic slave trade. This is where the founding of that Atlantic slave trade happened. So King Henry VII of England was the one who commissioned John Cabot. John Cabot was the one who came after Columbus. And he encouraged him to take another route, lead another voyage in the Atlantic to try and find those islands of Asia. And as most of you may or may not know, so John Cabot is also his voyage, his first voyage was successful, and he landed in what we call Newfoundland. And after that, he went back, and then he led another voyage, and he was never seen again, never heard of again. So, again, he was, a part of the beginning of that. Now, the Spaniards were the first Europeans to use African slaves in the New World. The islands that they targeted for this new use was Cuba and Hispaniola. I mentioned Hispaniola a little bit earlier. And here's what is, according to history, this is what when the first slaves arrived. So the first slaves arrived in Hispaniola between 1501 and 1517. Now, again, as I mentioned, by the year 1517, most of the natives had virtually been annihilated by the disease, and that was one of the biggest problems. And that's when Charles V came back and decided to, time went on. They did a lot of experiments in the islands. People don't know this. They did breeding in the islands. So from 1501, which was the beginning of the first slaves being arrived there, they did breeding. And what they would do is they would take males that were 15 years old that they had brought from Africa, and they would breed them just like they were horses or cattle. They would take them out, and their goal was to produce at least 15 offspring based on their breeding. 15 years, they would take them, breed them. They did this for years. They did this for years upon years. And then, as they got older, they would, and if they didn't produce, so let me talk about the consequences of if you were not a producer, you were not, fertile. If you were not fertile, they would castrate you and then throw the remains out in the public. Again, committing heinous acts against those whom they brought in from slavery. Over on these ships, some of the first, again, one of the first well-known slave carriage ships was Jesus of Lubeck. So I want to talk a little bit more about that as we get on down. But let's talk about some of the crops. So again, this continued till November 25th of 1542, and this is when the emperor decided to abolish slavery as decreed by some of the new laws that were there. Now again, this was abolished. Even in America, it was outlawed by the Spaniards. It was outlawed over the natives as well, but of course, slavery continued to still be practiced, as we all know. So Spain became the first country to officially abolish it. Now, again, the Spanish colonies of Cuba and Puerto Rico were famous for sugarcane. You also know, we'll talk a little bit later, that America became famous for cotton. These were some of the first crops that they were seeking to trade and to garner as a part of what they were doing, their ventures here in the Americas. So again, I want to go back. I want to talk a little bit about this. So again, Jesus of Lubeck, or the good ship Jesus, as called in English. So that's what it was referred to as well. So you'll find that there, that name as well often. So again, this is sailed from the free town of Lubeck around the early 16th century. And this was Queen Elizabeth and her successor, King James, as we know, of Scotland, or James I of England and Ireland, which is the same James that translated the Bible. They did their commission of this ship back in 1563. Now, Queen Elizabeth at that time, which is the great grandmother of King James, she's the one who actually commissioned the ship. She actually commissioned it to her grandfather, King Henry VIII of England. And it was originally used as a ship that was a warship. So that's what it was originally used for. And it didn't get into the slave trade until under the rule of John Hawkins. Now, for those that know John Hawkins was one of the first to organize, several trips throughout the years to the West African banks and the West Indies in the slave trade. This was between 1562 and 1568. So he did 4 trips under just the Jesus alone, but other ships as well. And at that time, they carried about 300 to 500 Africans to what is now considered to be modern-day Dominican Republic. Again, this is important because it helps you to understand how people were brought. A massive amount of people were expanded. Now, if you go back to what I was referring to in Deteronomy, it mentions what will happen for not keeping the Lord's statutes and commandments. Again, as people, that's why I'm telling you, the statutes and commandments are important. These things are super important. It's very, very important. I can't stress that enough, the importance. Go back and read it for yourself. It is important. So again, when we think about the Jesus of Louis, there were 5 additional ships that were in that particular fleet when that ship was commissioned. Of course, you guys probably know Francis Drake as well. He was a part of one of those ships. There were a couple of ships, and even as the Jesus ended up facing its fate right off of the coast of Veracruz, Mexico, in 1568. Even as it faced its defeat, then that ship was a part of the slave trade, which they did, that triangle trade. They went to different places, different areas, and traded their cargo, their human cargo, for many things. Gold. One of the things that they bartered when they went to the coast of Africa was weapons, guns. Some of the first guns were actually sold to the Africans in exchange for the slaves. So that's what you have to understand. It wasn't until later, as I get down the road, again, in part 2 of this, I want to talk about the translation of the Bible and the introduction of the name, which we all now refer to as Jesus. So I'll get into that a little bit later. But again, this is important because that was the first ship that was sailed. And as we know from there, slavery continued to expand, it continued to grow, it continued to, to develop in the Western world from that point forward. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't just the Spaniards. It was also the Portuguese, the Europeans, and the British, as well. So that's another thing to just keep in mind. So to end this, I want to talk a little bit about the conditions of slavery here in America. So as you think about the expansions and the history and the first ships coming to take those from the west coast of Africa, to enslave those here, the ships that sailed back with Columbus to take some of the original natives of the islands back to him, with him to England. Back with him to Spain. As you think about that, I want you to think about the conditions in which the slaves were held in. Think about the chains on the neck, which again, that's mentioned in Deuteronomy. If you go back to Deuteronomy 28, it mentions that the yoke shall be on your neck, iron yoke. As you think about them being sold and bartered, the breeding process that took place in the islands and then expanded. Think about, the older generations dying off, right? What is that essentially doing? It's cleansing the people of their culture. It's cleansing them of their language, of their names, of all of these different things. You're cleansing them over this period of time that leads up to now what we know to be 1619, which is when the first slaves were believed to be brought from the coast of Africa into America, into modern day America. So the conditions of those slaves brought in the hulls of ships, yokes around their neck, chains around their neck. Again, when they get here, they're sold just like cattle would be sold at an auction. They're auctioned off. Families are split and separated. The children are sold into slavery to different families. You see all these things. They build houses. They form crops. One of the big crops, cotton was king here in the U.S. That term cotton was king. It's ironic that Tim Cotton is the one who said that slavery was a necessary evil. So I want you to understand, why did slavery happen? It mentions it directly right there in Deuteronomy. Again, my encouragement to you as I leave you today is to go read it for yourself. I've shared quite a bit not only from a standpoint of scripture, but also from a historical standpoint. Anything that I've spoken of today, please go research it, look it up yourself. Do not take my word for it. I want you to look it up for your own, so that way it can become yours. Again, my encouragement is to look it up. Look forward to part 2 as well. So I'll be coming back a little bit later on with part 2, which will finish up this series, I want to talk about that 1611 King James translation of the original canons and manuscripts into English and the introduction of the name of Jesus. I want to get into Willie Lynch. So I've spoken about Willie Lynch before in the past, but I want to speak in depth about the Willie Lynch letter that he wrote that will help explain to you what you see going on in the communities today, and it'll also explain to you about even more in depth about the treatment of the slaves when they first arrived in the country, and how it was used as a mental way to control them for generations on forward. I'll talk a little bit about the worldwide of colored people or people of color, black, brown, yellow, and red people being the tail and not the head. From that point, the superiority, I'll get into that as well. I want to talk from a standpoint of definition about that. And then I want to talk a little bit about the 3/5 compromise, the the Constitution as it was written, and those things, and then talk a little bit about some things that took place in the 1800s, specifically around cotton reconstruction that took place in the South, and a lot more in depth about that. And also the killing and the torture of almost 6 million Jews in Germany. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and I want to end out with some scripture, a couple of scriptures that I'm going to end out with. I want to take you into Isaiah, visit some things there, and I want to also take you into the Holy Quran and talk through a little bit of some of the surahs that's there as well. Again, thank you for listening. I hope that these were life-giving teachings, that it helped educate you on some things. And as I mentioned throughout this, go and research it for yourself, please. I think this is really going to help you to understand who you truly are, and it'll help you to understand how you need to behave going forward and lead you on that path towards righteousness, love, peace, joy. So I'll leave you as I greeted you in the beginning. Assalamu alaikum. Shabbat shalom to those that celebrate. God bless. Peace.